Hi everyone, this is my 12 journals of 2016 and it is inspired by Tim Holtz's 12 tags of 2016, and this time Tim introduced us or reintroduced us to monoprinting and using embossing and texture paste together. So he's been looking back at his tags and combining different techniques that he's taught us to create a brand new tag, and that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm following his inspiration, but this time I'm going to be making a journal by the end of the year. So my two tags that I did at the time of the techniques are, this is the June tag that he used for monoprinting, and that's how mine turned out. So it's amazing how different interpretations can take a single or a couple of ideas. That's why I really love this challenge. I have to stick this lucky 7 back on, not so lucky after all. And the other technique that we're looking at is using embossing paste and embossing powder, sort of creating a texture emboss. And that was how Tim's turned out, and this with the lovely raised blue dots is how mine turned out. So two techniques, and this is how Tim's reinterpreted those in 2016, and I'm going to reinterpret mine now with a journal page. So each of my pages measures 10¼ inches by 7 inches. You can see here I am embossing a little gusset in the middle of the page. So I emboss a line at 5 inches, flip the page over and emboss another line, and I find folding the embossed lines as you go makes it a little bit easier to create that little gusset. And the gusset will act in two ways. One, it will allow me to tie these pages into a journal once I've finished this set of pages for this year, and two, it allows for extra bulky embellishments, and you will see that that's going to really come into play on this page because it's full of texture. Wondering how this is going to work, each of my pages has a tag. So this was January's page. You can see it also has a little tag. That's the reminder of my original inspiration on the back of the tag. So this page will attach to the previous page, and it will build up in this way. Each pocket that I create by joining the pages together will have or house a tag that goes with that page. And I'll be using 2 of Tim's stencils for this page, and one of them is hearts and the other is stripes. I'll be using the stripes to create a sort of tartan look with the monoprinting technique, and I'm going to be using the hearts for the texture embossing. So I'm starting out by giving myself a really quick base. I'm going to be using pumice stone for this, so it's probably my favourite pale colour in the Distress Ink range. I really do like the tone. It's sort of a minky beige colour, and I really like the way it looks, and you can see it does make a great colour for the things that will be added to this afterwards. I'm keeping things light. I did start off thinking, as you can see, a little bit of pink paint in the left hand side of this video. I did think I was going to go bright, but I don't know why I changed my mind. So you can see I did that really quickly. Wasn't too bothered about the cloudy look I was getting. I just wanted to create a sort of neutral background, and you can see here I'm just flicking a little bit of water over to add even more texture into the ink. And then once everything's dry, I'm going over again with the pumice stone, exactly the same tone on tone, and using the heart stencil to put some hearts into the background. So this is one of Tim's stamps, and I'm also again tone on tone. You can see what you can create all with one ink colour. I'm getting lots of texture, but the background is still nice and neutral. And now I'm ready to get monoprinting. So this is one of those pages that just seemed to take me ages. I wasn't quite sure where I was going with it. As you can see from the choice of colour in the beginning, I thought it was going to go bright, then I went neutral. So it did take me a while. I'm just going to try and give you the highlights and the main techniques that I used in order to create this look. So I've got myself a selection of distress paints. I've got my stripy stencil, and I'm just going to be using different colours of distress paint in order to create a kind of plaid or tartan background. So I'm being careful. The beauty of the applicators of this means I can kind of keep my paint where I want it. I'm not trying to overly load the stencil with paint, just give it a nice amount of colour, and then I am printing on to my tag. So this is what monoprinting is all about, adding paint or ink to your stencil and then using it as a stamp. So you can see I didn't get enough paint on the first time around, so I'm coming back in for try number 2, and I'm using a piece of kitchen roll each time I press this down onto my background. You can see I folded the page in half because this stencil wasn't big enough to do the whole run in one go. So I'm just moving this along. I have to be a bit careful not to put my page into that puddle of paint. And the colours that I'm using are peeled paint, dried sage, antique linen, and what's the other one? Pumice stone, of course. So that's one pass, and then I'm going to repeat that on the other half. So just moving the stencil along each time to create a series of stripes across the page. And by using the kitchen roll, I can just take care of any overloading of paint and still maintain those stripes. You can see I'm not trying to get perfect stripes. The actual stencil itself is supposed to look distressed, and by using it in this way, you're not going to get a perfect print. You're going to get a hint of what you are trying to achieve. So I've gone in one direction with my stencil, and now I'm flipping it over. You can see I'm trying to keep my colours pretty much where they started, and you can see now that I really do get a lovely look of a sort of linen texture in multicolours, or a tartan effect. And then I'm getting a lovely, you can see how all those textures that I put in the beginning are sort of fading into the background, but everything is bringing something to the overall look on the page. Tons and tons of ways that you can use your stencils to monoprint. You don't have to just use paint, you can use your inks. I'm just saying now that do remember, if you're using paint on your stencils, to get it cleaned up more or less straight away, because otherwise you'll have great difficulty getting acrylic paint off a plastic stencil. I'm just using baby wipe and getting rid of all of that colour. So on to technique number 2, and I'm going to be using my Holtz stencil and some clear embossing paste, or texture paste should I say. And again, I'm just randomly creating some hearts on my page. So this embossing paste dries clear, but you could use one that is coloured, or you could use a white, because we're going to cover the wet embossing paste with embossing powder. And I've decided to go with 2 colours here. I'm just getting rid of any dodgy bits of embossing paste that I don't want. And then I'm going to be using a pewter by Stampendous and a distress peeled paint colour embossing powder. So 1 distress colour and 1 pewter sort of metallic colour, and that will give me a really nice blended effect on the embossing of the embossing paste. You can see I'm just sprinkling it on to make sure that I get a sort of 2-tone effect. You are going to lose a little bit of embossing powder here, unless you want to collect that up and use that as a separate colour. But because I'm just sprinkling it on lightly, I'm not going to lose too much. Because I have not completely dried my paint. I had a few little strays on the embossing powder, so I have got rid of those, and then it's time, just exactly as you would have had you stamped and embossed, to heat that embossing powder. Now remember, this is quite a thick paste now underneath the embossing powder, so you're likely to get some sort of bubbling and texture going on as you heat this up, but that's fine, and it really does add to this look. You can see here I'm getting a combination of the sort of matte finish with the distressed powder in the green, and then the shiny popping through from that pewter embossing powder. I really like those colours, they go well with my background, and I've added more texture to my tag. The other thing I'm going to do, which I thought might work, is create lots and lots of different textures on hearts, sort of create my own heart confetti, and I'm going to use that to build up even more texture on my page. And what better way to do that than to create my hearts using the large hearts on the bottom of the stencil. I'm just using the cut off strips that I've got left over from creating my journal pages, and then I'm going to give each one of these little strips a different texture. More embossing of the embossing paste. So literally I'm just creating texture this time. I'm working on the reverse of the strip, and then I'm going to cover that in embossing powder. So just flatten it out a little bit. There's a little bit too much texture on there for my liking. And then I'm going to sort of double embossing powder this strip. So you've probably done this with glitter before, or sand, and I'm going through my stencil to start with the distress colour, and then I could have really tidied that up looking at it now, naughty Helen. And then I'm going back over with the pewter. Now I've definitely got my own mix of embossing powder now, I've wasted all that, so I'll put that into a pot and perhaps use that later. Now, because I know these are going to be really, really small, I'm really just trying to create texture rather than perfect patterns. If I'd wanted a big area of what I've just done, I would have taken my time to get real definition between the two different colours. And once again, you can see as I heat this, the embossing powder is adding texture as well as that embossing paste bubbling up as I use the heat gun. So my second strip, I'm just using the bundled sage, I think I said dried sage earlier, bundled sage distress paint, and drying that off, adding a second layer just to get a nice depth of colour, even though it's a pale colour. Drying that layer off, then adding some stripes through the stencil, this time with the pumice stone distress ink, so mimicking the kind of stripes that I had on my background. And you can see here, once you cut these little hearts out, because this one dried quite quickly, I'm going to get little stripy green hearts, or I'm going to get really textured hearts, not quite dry. Try not to burn my fingers with the other strip. So what to do now? So on with a layer of antique linen distress paint, and this one is pumice stone. I'm working on two strips at the same time here. So going in for the second layer to get good colour on that strip, and the same with the antique linen. So that's nice and dry, and again I'm using the stamp that I used in the background, the pumice stone distress ink, and adding the texture to that strip. And I have to say, looking at my fingers, you can see that this definitely was a page full of inky goodness and painty stuff to really get your fingers into. So a little bit of splatter this time with some brown distress ink. And then last but not least, I'm going to add some distress glitter to this strip. So I'm going to cover the entire strip with a layer of glue and making it nice and thick, but I'm using a palette knife just to smooth it off before I add that yummy glitter. So working on a piece of scrap paper to catch the excess, not wasting it this time. This really is one of my favourite colours. It's a gorgeous antique looking glitter, and pop that safely back in the pot. And it's time to let all my strips dry, sit down in front of the telly with a cup of coffee and cut out all those hearts. So sometime much later, lots of little heart confetti cut out, and I'm going to add some definition to my page by using gathered twigs to ink the edges. So you can see the page is already full of texture, but I'm really going to go overboard. And you can see there where the actual paint that I monoprinted with resisted the ink, so that's something to remember. If you want a resist technique, you can use your distress paint and your distress inks to create lots of looks using that property of the distress paint. So you can see now I'm going to ink all of the hearts because it gives them just that little bit of definition. My thought is that I want to just create a kind of scatter of hearts in the bottom left and a slightly smaller one in the top right corner, using all of these different textured hearts on the page. First of all, I wanted to add some more interest to the top and bottom edges of my page, so I'm going to do that with some washi tape that I had that went with the colours that I've been using so far. And I'm also going to add some romantic lace because this is going to be a romantic page when it's finished for the month of February. So Tim did a nice romantic looking tag, and although I'm not using the same colours or the same elements, I'm going to create a romantic page. Now, as I create these pages, you'll see that they have got some meaning behind them. They've either marking something that happened in the month that I've created the page, or they're going to be associated with a memory for that particular month. And of course, this is all about romance, so mine is going to be about me and my lovely hubby. So I've been all the way around the page with the washi tape, and now I'm going to add some romantic lace across the top and the bottom edges. So I'm using a really strong double-sided tape, and I'm deliberately trying to get a little bit of that edging showing across the top of the page. I didn't quite have the right width of double-sided tape, so I'm using 2 strips of thin. And you can see straight away I've lost some of that zigzag pattern, but it made it a lot more subtle just having it peeping over the edge of the lace. And then I'm using glue to attach the edge of the lace to the back of the page. And that'll do 2 things. 1, it will secure it, and 2, it will stop it fraying. So I'm not too worried about the other 2 edges because most of those will be covered up with the hearts. Now it's time to start randomly gluing the hearts onto the page, and you'll see as I go through this video I do lose that green. I wasn't keen on it. I think it was just a little bit too yellowy compared to the rest of the page, and I don't know, something about it said I don't like it, so I took it off. So trying to be random, trying to mix up those textures and create a whole heap of hearts in the bottom left hand corner. So as well as using that, I'm using some of these little resin roses, and this is where that extra gusset will come in handy because they're quite raised and I will still be able to close my book by the end of the year. So this is me pulling those hearts out, and I think you can see straight away they didn't really belong there, and I'm going to have to dig that one out of underneath there, but just adding some more of those hearts in where I've pulled the distress glitter ones out. So I've kept the pumice stone distress glitter hearts, but I've got rid of the peeled paint ones. There we go. No one will ever know. Now I was really thinking texture with this corner of my work, so I do start to add other things in and around those hearts to bring more texture to the page. So I'm starting with the little roses, thinking about adding other little elements, and then I decided on adding some glitter and some tiny micro beads. So this is where I start. So I'm adding little puddles of glue and sprinkling on those micro beads. And I know that once this glue is dry, it is going to dry clear. So make sure that if you do this kind of thing that you are using a glue that dries clear, otherwise you'll be able to see more glue and you'll be able to see that lovely texture brought with those beads. And then I'm going to bring the right hand corner up to the same point. I'm using obviously less hearts and covering a smaller area, but all the techniques are the same. Just layering up the hearts, adding a few roses and adding a little bit of texture with those micro beads. You can see the little micro beads are a little bit difficult to handle. You do end up working on a roller skate if you're not careful. All those little beads congregate on your mat and your work does move about a bit if you're not too careful. It might be an idea to work on a tray if you really want to capture all those beads and not have them rolling about the place, because they have got a little life of their own. So when I created this, it was just slightly before Valentine's Day, so I was thinking Valentine's and I decided to write my hubby a little poem to include on this page. Now I printed the poem out twice. I wasn't sure what green I was going to use, but I ended up going with the lighter shade. So you can see the dark looks okay, but I preferred the lighter green. So I'm going to use the poem that I have written and I'm going to cut it into little strips to put onto my journal page. Now the reason I chose to write a poem, besides it being Valentine's Day in February, was because it is a little bit of a tradition for Ivan and I, since we've been courting many years ago, to write poems. And I have to say that my husband has tried to write poems, and now I'm not saying I'm the world's best. I do like a poem that rhymes, so nothing too fancy. But Ivan, let's say, he's a trier. And that makes it even more sweet because I've got a few little poems written in cards that really do warm my heart when I read them. So that's another little memory attached to this page. I'm using two of my favourite photographs of us. They were taken a couple of years ago now. One of them was at a wedding and the other one is when we went on holiday as a family. Sort of first family holiday where I've managed to get both my boys together in New York, so that was really nice. But I'm keeping just to the two photographs of Ivan and I, as this is a romantic page. So just working out how I'm going to put this on my page. I'm going to do a little bit of the poem on the left and a little bit on the right, and the strips are a little bit long, so I think I'm going to be cutting those down because I don't want them to go over that gusset area, because I know that I'm going to be using strings or ribbons to tie these into the journal. And I'm using a Ranger matte medium to attach these little strips, being careful to try and keep my poem in order. And I'll try and read it to you as I stick these down. So, thanks to Mr. Cupid with his arrow straight and true, my heart is full of love and stuff especially for you. The romance month is here again, so it's time to ask once more a question I have asked you over 30 times before, showing my age there. You are the keeper of this tender loving heart of mine, so time to ask you once again, please be my Valentine. Oh, how romantic. They're just disappearing a little bit off the screen there, but exactly the same thing again. I'm adding the matte medium and sealing all of those strips that I've printed out on my computer. Now, as I was drawing my page, I started to think that I'm not too keen on the beads I've added, but it's too late now. So what can I do to make them less obvious? They're a bit dark, I think, and I've been a bit heavy-handed with them. So my plan is to add more definition to my hearts, and you can see straight away by adding that slightly darker colour that is going to help not make those beads look quite so obvious. I'm using a chalk pastel pencil by Faber-Castell in a brown, just to smudge around the hearts and onto the page to create some shadows to blend in with those beaded areas. So literally drawing around the hearts and smudging the pastel out with my fingertip. Now this is where I had a little bit of a break because I just wanted to make sure I was going along the right direction before I did this all over the page. So I've added some green glitter, some green glass glitter, and I've also added shading around my paper strips and some glossy accents, and I felt that that was enough to give it a bit more balance. Everything was too light everywhere but the beads, so I had to add some darkness into the mix to sort of other emphasis in other areas to stop those beads being quite so obvious on the page. This chalk pastel pencil is from Faber-Castell and it's from their Neutrals range, and it really is another nice way to add some soft shading onto a page, and you can just get a nice blend by the fact that this is very chalky, and you can just run your finger over the surface to smudge the line out. So now I'm just coming in with glossy accents and some of that glass glitter, and by putting it over the top of the micro beads, it just lightens the effect again of those beads by bringing in that touch of green sparkle. And then I decided to add a further amount of texture to those hearts by just making some of them shiny. So I chose the green hearts to highlight with the glossy accents, and I also highlighted that romantic poem with the glossy accents. Now whenever you're using glossy accents, remember, if you try and keep the nozzle of the applicator in the puddle of glossy accents while you work, you're much less likely to get air bubbles. You do get the odd one, but they're easily got rid of with a fine pin. And now I'm going to work on some of the other elements while that glossy accent is drying. So I'm using some bundled sage to create a frame for the little photograph I'm going to use on the page. I've also got some little heart charms with some embossed detail, so I'm just picking that out again with that green distress paint. I'm just rubbing that paint into the pattern that are on these silver charms. So time to work on the tag. So the tags measure 5¼ inches by 6 inches, and I'm using the same techniques as I used on the page to create a matching tag. So across the top edge of the tag, the piece that will be visible, I've used a strip of the washi tape, and then I'm covering the rest of the tag with the pumice stone ink. So I'm doing that on both sides because one side will have my photograph and the memory for the month, and the other side will have a picture of Tim's tag, the original inspiration for this page. So inking first with pumice stone, then coming back through the heart stencil, remembering that all the detail only needs to be on the edges because that's all you will be able to see, and adding a little bit of stamping with, this is a border stamp from Stampers Anonymous Classic Favourites number 6. So it's something I've had in my collection forever, and repeating that on the other side of the tag. Adding a photo of Tim's original inspiration, just inking the edges to one side. You can see, can't really see very much of the edge of the tag. And then that favourite photo of hubby and I in New York, and we were absolutely freezing, even though the sky is a gorgeous blue. Adding that chalk pastel definition around the edges, exactly as I did on the hearts of the page. It's all about making the style of the tag match the style of the page. And I'm going to create a little area on the right hand side of the photograph where I can journal about this memory. And I decided to use a little bit, or a little heart, to emphasise where I'm going to add the ribbon to the top of the tag. I could have just left the hearts if I wanted to, but I like the idea of having all these little different ribbons on the outside edge of the journal once this is finished. So you can see here, first of all, I thought I would cut a circle out of the heart because I've got that lovely texture. Couldn't quite manage it, and then I thought, what the heck, I'll use the hearts. Glad I did, really. Because it just adds to that romantic feel for the tag, making sure that it's right in the middle, and then I can punch through both of those hearts ready to attach the ribbon. And using the Bundle Sage paint just to colour the American seam binding ribbon. This is a nice way to make your ribbon match your project. Just bear in mind though, when you're using distress paint, it does make your ribbon a little bit more stiff. And whilst everything is still drying, you can see the glossy accents isn't quite there yet. I'm just using a little bit of foam tape to add my little portrait of hubby and I into that little bundle of hearts. And then I'm just going to reattach a glittery heart to make it look like the heart is holding the picture in place. And the ribbon is nice and dry, so I'm just looping a double layer of the ribbon through the heart. Now I'm being a little bit careful here as I pull this ribbon. It's a little bit stiff to pull against itself once you have added the paint, but as well, because I'm using a double layer, it's just taking me a minute to pull this through and loop it through the heart without pulling the heart back off the page. So I've got 4 little strips of ribbon that I'm going to trim. Now you might think that these are going to end up a little bit long, but I'm not sure how long they're going to end up, so I'm erring on the side of caution, and I'm just trimming those lengths of ribbon on the top of the tag. I'm just going to keep them all the same, so I'm using this one as a measure. And then adding one of my little painted hearts with a long brad. Just tucking the brad under the ribbon and attaching it to the tag. As I had a little bit of ribbon left over, I've just tied a knot and trimmed it up to look like a bow, and I'm going to use my glue to first of all attach the little silver heart, so there'll be one on the page and one on the tag, and then a little tiny bit of ribbon to the bottom of our photograph. And just to remind you as I get to these little finishing touches that there will be a list of the dimensions for this journal over on my blog, and you'll be able to get to that via the link that will be below this video. There's also going to be a playlist created for each of these pages. If you find this page by chance and you want to look at the other pages in the journal, it depends when you join us in 2016 or perhaps in years to come, just to let you know that there is a series of these videos and you will see the whole journal from start to finish. I liked to add the date to the top of the tag because this pokes out at the side of the journal. And I'm using some of these teeny tiny letters from Tim Holtz in order to do that, and it gives me a little bit of continuity along the edge of my book. You can see here now everything's dry, that because of the gusset everything is going to close up, even though I've got those really quite bulky hearts in position. I was, not hearts, flowers. I was careful to try not to put one right next to the other when you close the page so that I got double the amount of depth caused by the embellishments. Now the other thing that I'm going to do, because this edge is going to create a pocket for the February tag, I like to add some strips. They're 1/4 inch strips, and I'm going to form a U shape by attaching 3 layers of card strips to create a pocket. So I'm going right along just to the inside of the edge of the page, and this will attach to March's page to create that pocket. And the reason that I'm adding the strips is just to make sure that the tags slide nicely into the pockets. I've added sort of depth to the tags by the fact that I've added photographs and things and washi tape and such, so I don't want them to get stuck in the pockets, and you can see how this will fit. So my bottom strip just goes right along that bottom edge, avoiding the fold area of the gusset. I'm using glue to do this because I always find that double-sided tape has a residue along the edge of anything you attach, so I don't want my tags to get stuck in these pockets, hence I'm using glue. And you can see how that pocket is going to form once I attach the next page. So that is my February page finished, and I will attach them eventually together and it will start to form a book, and those tags will sit in those pockets. So I think you can see the difference between January and February is enormous. So just having a couple of different techniques each month and you can go on a completely new adventure. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how this book turns out by the end of the year. So if you want to join in with Tim's challenge with the tags, it is linked down below. But in the meantime, I always ask you if you will subscribe if you don't already. If you've enjoyed my video, I ask you to like it and share it, because it really does help me build my audience and find other like-minded crafters like you and I who love to get inky and painty and create fab stuff. So I hope you've enjoyed this journal page and look forward to bringing you March's page very shortly. Thank you for watching. And there'll always be a link at the end of these 12 journals of 2016 to the playlist, and there is a link here.